Hello everyone, I wanted to do a quick tutorial on LR Timelapse and how I use LR Timelapse to help process my time-lapse projects and my videos, my photos, and how I create them and turn them into a video from a bunch of still images. If you are new to LR Timelapse, I highly recommend you go look at some of the beginners guides and the beginning videos that the owner of LR Timelapse puts together. This is more for those people. This is designed for those people who already have kind of a general knowledge of LR Timelapse, but it's about the routine that I think that's real important that will help you guys find things, find a routine for you and a pattern for you that you'll be able to get into. And once you find that groove and once you work through what looks like a daunting project at first, after a while it becomes very, very rudimentary. And I think that you'll find that you'll like this little process too. So come on with me and come on over with me and I will show you my own process. All right, guys, so step one, I think it's important to just kind of go over just a real brief guide of what we're looking at here. Of course, here I have LR Timelapse open here, and I'm just going to be navigating, or I'm going to be switching back and forth to Lightroom. And I think before you even get into LR Timelapse, let's go into what I think is really important so that you can actually have a really consistent video. So it's really important to take these very first steps, and it's actually not going to be in LR Timelapse. It's actually going to be in Lightroom. And I think what you need to do first will go a long way in getting you set up for your time lapses in LR Timelapse. So when I first import something, and I will just expand the window here. So as you can tell, when you go to import your photos, your time-lapse sequences, it's really important. Right here you can see on one day I took 5,757 images from start to finish. That was a long day of storm chasing, I will tell you that. Not all of these are just time-lapse sequences, but the ones that are, you can see, are broken down here. So what I like to do is I like to break down each time-lapse sequence into a subfolder. So if you have all of your images, as you can see at the bottom here, and if you do import them with other photos that, like for example, this image was from a Canon 5D Mark III, I think it was. Yep, I even have that in the title. Now, this one was from a Canon 5D Mark III, and it's kind of mixed in with all of the other photos. I highly encourage you not to do that like I just did. But if you do, you can always go to grid view, right? So if you use this little button right here, grid view, you want to go to metadata up here, and then it actually shows you all the different, that shows you the 3 different cameras that I was using. And I always use one particular for a time lapse, and that is my Sony A7R III. And you can even break it down to, you can choose the Sony, and then you can choose all of the time lapses that were used. As you can tell, I used the 14mm, the Sigma 14mm f1.8 art lens for a good majority of the time-lapse sequences. So now that you have them like this, you can actually select the first one from this whole batch, and then you can scroll down and find out where it ends. As you can see, obviously it changes there. You do not want to import the whole thing or have one folder with different time-lapse sequences. So you want to select the first one, select the last one by holding the Shift key down. Sorry, Mac users, I think it's Command Shift, but you'd hold the first one, and then you come down to the end. And this is just an example. Hold the Shift key down and select all of them. And in that same folder, what I like to do is I'll right-click right here, and I've already done this, but it'll say Create Folder Inside, and I like to do that. And when I do, it actually shows you this option, and it says Create Folder. And what I will do is I will title it. As you can already see here, I will title it the name, a particular name for the time-lapse sequence. When I'm in a certain town, like Green Valley, as this one says, it shows that I have 5 different sequences, and so I did this for each time-lapse sequence from each location, and I went ahead and called it Green Valley A, B, C, D, E, and it shows you each, and shows you how many photos were captured during those sequences, right? And so you would title the folder whatever you want to title it, and you're going to make sure this box is checked. Okay, it says include selected photos, and that's really important, obviously, so that it takes just that time-lapse sequence and puts it in a nice little folder for you. So when I get to Green Valley, or when I get to Rio Rico A, I've already processed these other ones. I try to do them on the fly, or as soon as I can, because I don't want my time-lapse sequences to back up, because they do take some time to do. So here we are at Rio Rico A, and now that you've done that, I'm going to show you what I do next. Okay guys, so you've imported your time-lapse sequence and all of your other photos, all 5,757, into Lightroom, and they're all just kind of, at first they were all divided into different folders and all of that. Hopefully you've got that one particular sequence that you really want to work with, and all of the others can wait, but you have a start time and an end time from just that particular time-lapse sequence, like I have here. This one's called Rio Rico A, and I have two of those. I have two time-lapse sequences from Rio Rico that I used. And what I think is important before we even go further is that you take a look at those photos and make sure that they all look good. And the way I do it, and it might not work for you if you don't have a very fast PC, or if these images are not on a faster hard drive, I recommend you put your sequences, when you're going to work with them, there's my kitty, by the way. I recommend you put them on at least an SSD and work within LR Timelapse and Lightroom with your sequence at least on an SSD. I'm actually using this boot drive, which is bad me, but usually I will put them on a separate storage drive, on a separate SSD. But in this case, that's fine. I have a M.2 storage drive, which is really fast. So I'm going to show you what I like to do. So I'll take the first image, and it pops it up here. And if you've imported by building not standard previews, but smart previews, you'll get a quick look at how these images look from start to finish. If you just select the first one, and with the right arrow key, you can kind of start scrolling through, right? So I'm just holding the arrow key down. You don't want to hold it down for too long, because it'll catch up with you. But as you can see, it's kind of giving me a little bit of a taste of my sequence here, right? And I'm just scrolling through the images very, very fast. If this is on a, that looks really cool, by the way. I haven't processed this, so I was just looking at that. But if this sequence is on a hard disk drive, on an HDD, then you're going to find that this takes forever, and this might not work for you. So hopefully you can go through all of the images. If there are things that you don't like, or you messed up the sequence, or something isn't a part of the sequence, I just went through the whole thing. But if you realize that you messed up a part of that sequence, you can go ahead and delete those images. For example, if you selected 4 and they were 4 images at the end that didn't belong as a part of that sequence, you can get rid of them, you can move them, whatever you do. But as you can see here, I have a clean sequence here from start to finish. It started there, and then it ended all the way, and I'll scroll over here, ended right over here. And it actually looked good when I just scrolled through all of the standard or the smart previews, and it tells me I'm ready to go with LR Timelapse. I know it's a long way of getting started to just get there, but that's half of the work. So let me show you what we do next. Okay guys, we're all set. Our sequence is ready in Lightroom, and we're ready to actually get into LR Timelapse and take a look at starting to build this project in there. The first thing I highly recommend you do is, since I only have this a single image up, we're going to go back to grid view here. And we want to make sure that we're still in the library tab here. We want to stay in the library module. And what I just did is I selected everything. So Control A, I think it's Command A in Mac, sorry guys, but it's Control A selects all of my images, and I'm ready to go. So now let's go ahead and open up LR Timelapse. And I'm going to come over here. Obviously that's not the sequence, that's a prior rendered sequence. And this over here in the LR Timelapse program, you can see all of the other sequences that I've already rendered. I'm just going to briefly take you guys, if you haven't already done this, you'll want to be working in the visual workflow tab. There's other tabs here when you open up LR Timelapse, and I'm not going into those. I'm working in the visual workflow, and 99.9% of the time I always work in that tab. So let's come on over to the visual workflow, and we want to then navigate on the bottom left over here. We want to find our images. Wherever you place those images in Lightroom, they're going to be in LR Timelapse. So I have to navigate all the way down here to Rio Rico A. And here's what happens, guys. You just click it, it's loading the directory, and then you just need to just sit back for a little bit. It's going to load all of the EXIF data, as you can see going on right here. And it doesn't take too long. There we go. I'm going to skip this part. Here we go, guys. Now it's going to give me a preview, and it's going to build a quick preview of all of these images. So, as it does that, over here on the left, you can see, and I'll open this one a little bit more. You can see it beginning to generate kind of an exposure preview. And by doing this, it's just generating the luminance and aperture, shutter speed, ISO, and it's pulling all of that data into a timeline, basically right here on the left. A nice visual look at, so you can see that this exposure is actually a little underexposed, which I like to do using my camera, the Sony a7R III. I like to underexpose daytime images by about, one stop, around one stop, sometimes a little less, sometimes a little more. But I don't want to clip the highlights, and I don't want to have too many highlights that I have to worry about. And of course the shadows in the Sony are really good. All right guys, so now it's loaded. You saw that line fill up to the right. This is what we're going to do next. Okay, so here we go, finally actually getting involved in the actual process. And if you look up here in LR Timelapse, you have something called Keyframes wizard in the visual workflow, Holy Grail, save, drag to Lightroom, reload, auto transition, visual previews, and visual deflicker will be almost the last thing. And then you can render the video by exporting the images. You can render the video using LR Timelapse, or you can render it using something else like a Premiere Pro or DaVinci Resolve. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start off with Keyframes wizard. You click that button, and it's giving you an estimate. It says, I think you need about 3 keyframes, 3 or 4 keyframes. And what those do is those are actual placeholder frames and actual photos that you are going to edit. You're not going to edit 763 images like I have on this project. Heavens no. LR Timelapse is going to do the work for you on that. And it's a really great thing that's what that's for. I'm actually only going to edit about, I really never like doing anything under 5 personally. Even for a small, shorter clips, I will usually edit about 4 to 6 photos, and in a longer one you can extend that to 20 or even longer if you need to. But I think that a snapshot of 1, 2, 3, 4, let's go with, it's asking for about 6. Actually, I'm going to do about 6. So by selecting 6, it's going to give me 6 photos specifically that I'm going to edit, that when I'm done, LR Timelapse is going to build a nice, beautiful, smooth transition between all 6 of those images, so that there's no flicker, so that the exposure is even as you go along. So by doing that, in this case, I don't need the Holy Grail wizard. I was hoping it would, but In this case, I don't need this. However, if this was a day to night transition sequence where the sun's going down and your exposure keeps getting ramped up, you would use this also. And I usually don't mess with the settings. I'll click on that. Whatever it asks, I usually just stick with those settings. You can mess with that in a later module, and I can actually do a video on the Holy Grail method later. But in this case, I'm happy with the 6. I'm going to click Save there. And at that point, it took all the metadata, the keyframes, and it applied that to the metadata of the files. Now here is where we have to start jumping back and forth into Lightroom. So it even says here, drag to Lightroom. And if you just hover over it, it'll tell you how you need to do that if the sequence is already in Lightroom. Is the sequence already in Lightroom? It is, because we actually just did that before we got here. So we're pretty much ready to go. And in this case, I'm going to follow the directions where it says set filter, go to grid view, select all, and then read metadata from files. That sounds confusing, but let me show you how easy it is. Okay guys, we're ready to go into Lightroom. So let's go ahead and, now that we've saved, it says drag to Lightroom. In this case, I don't need to drag anything because I have Lightroom already open. So let's go over to Lightroom. We have this entire sequence already ready to go. And if you forgot to click, if you forgot to select all of your images, the first thing you're going to want to do, my kitty cat, pet the kitty cat, yeah. The first thing you're going to want to do is select all of your images. And in doing so, I have all of those 763 images ready to be worked on. In this case, LR Timelapse told me to select them all. I'm going to come up here, and this is a part of my routine. I come up to metadata, and we want to read, right? LR Timelapse wrote particular keyframes to the metadata. Now we're in LR Timelapse, and we want to read that data. So they're basically going to be handing off the project back and forth to each other. And in this case, I click read metadata from files, and here we go. Up on the top left, it shows you in LR Timelapse that it's reading the XMP metadata. It's important that you let it do its thing. In my case, 763 files is kind of a lot, so. So now that the keyframes are a part of the metadata in our files, we want to go ahead and, since they're all selected, we're going to come down to the filters tab down here at the bottom right, which you can't see but because I'm in the way here. I'm going to come down to the filters tab, and you can see here there's a selection that says LRT5 keyframes, and we want to just select those. And what you can see here is I have 6 images, right? If you remember, I selected 6 photos as keyframes from start to finish back in LR Timelapse. So here is where we're going to do edits of just 6 photos, guys, out of 700 and something images. We're only going to edit 6 photos, and we're going to be very very cautious with how we edit these. We want our time lapse to look nice and clean, and we don't want the images to look too wishy-washy or too scrubbed or too bad. So what I like to do is I actually have a preset. So now that I've selected the very first one, I'm going to come to the develop module. Now let me bring this back down and actually get my ugly mug out of the way here. So what I want to do here is take this, however you choose to edit your photos, you can process however you want. I have my own presets that maybe I will sell one of these days, but I have an LR time-lapse sharpness preset specifically for my Sony a7R III and this particular lens. It actually works pretty well, and if you look right now in the develop module, it's always just a little bit over sharpened and a little bit too crunchy, as they say. But I like to bring that back. I'll bring that back manually, and I want to make sure that my exposure is good. bring up the shadows just a little bit. And the highlights, just bring those back a little bit. As you can see, you got a nice little rain shower here. A little bit of noise reductions applied a little liberally here. As you can see, the Sony a7R III is a very clean, produces really clean images. I don't really need that much noise reduction. But I'm not going to show you guys my entire editing process just on how I do that. But I like to bring up the shadows a little bit. And I think I need to fix the horizon just a tad. It was at an angle and I was up on a hill. So I was hoping the storm would come all the way north. But another storm formed as I was filming that. All right, so I finally finished one image and I'm ready to move on to the next one. Now that I'm happy with this particular image, it's real important to follow these next few steps. So I want to select the first image and then control and click the second image so that you've selected both of them. So now I have image 1, keyframe 1 and keyframe 2 selected. Come up to the scripts tab, and under scripts you're going to use either LR Timelapse sync keyframes or with the gradients only, and that was some of the things that we dealt with earlier with the gradients, but I didn't use the gradients, so I'm fine, and I just want to sync the entire keyframe. Basically I'm copying and pasting all of the settings that I did in the first photo into the second photo. And as you can tell, they're not very close as far as the sequence because they're spaced out evenly. So in this particular image, I'm just going to tweak it just a little bit, give it a little bit more exposure since the clouds showed up, and maybe bring my highlights down just a little bit. And now that I've edited that photo, I'm going to do the same thing that I just did with the other one. So I'm taking the second one, control, click and select the third one, and I'm going to do the exact same thing here. LR Timelapse sync keyframes, and it just did it again. So I deselect and just come back just to the third one, and I look at the third one and I see I'm actually back up to just a little bit of an overexposure, and I want to bring that back down here. Okay, I think that looks pretty good without having to make any other changes to any of the settings. And you should be real careful from in making major adjustments, because if you do that, you will see some weird things in the final project that LR Timelapse will do. So try to keep your settings as close as possible between each other. We're going to do the same thing between 3 and 4. Scripts, go up to scripts, LR Timelapse sync keyframes. Look what we did here. I'm going to speed this up again. That looks really good. I love how the clouds are sharp. And look at that downpour. And we have another downpour right here. So we actually have 2 little storms forming. I think that looks good. So I'm not going to make any changes. Maybe just a hair. Maybe bump the contrast just a hair. And now I'm going to select 4 and 5. Come up to scripts. LR Timelapse sync keyframes. And it changed to the 5th one now, as you can see here. I think that looks really good. I love the deep blue sky. The greens look good. I just need to bump it up just like a 10th, I don't know. So we're going to do that to the final one. Select, sync keyframes. And there you go. That final one, you can make the last adjustment as needed. Okay, and I am done with all 6 of my keyframes. I've only edited 6 photos, guys, and everything else is going to be based off of those 6 photos. So let's show you what's next. All right, guys, so we have our 6 keyframes, right? We have our 6 photos that we've edited. And what we want to do is we want to get in the habit of doing this. This is what I've actually learned to do. I make a circle. I go in a circle from this point. And so the very first thing is on the right, I will start back here where it says LRT5 keyframes. Now we want to see the full sequence. So you're going to select LRT full sequence. So here we have the entire sequence, but we're still in the develop module. So now that I went to here, I need to come full circle this way and click on the library tab. So now we're back in library and we have our entire project right in here, our entire sequence. How are we going to do that? How are we going to see all of it? Well, let's go back to the grid view. So we went from full sequence up to the library tab and back down and around to the grid view. So now I have the grid view. You can see the one image that and the one keyframe that I actually edited. And if you scroll down, you can see the others in there somewhere as well. They're in there somewhere. And there's the final one. And the rest are in there, but we just can't see them. So what we want to do now is, now that we've got them all in here, we want to Control A and select them all again. So I've selected all of the photos. And now what do we want to do? How are we going to take these images and including the edits that we just did and push them back into Lightroom, into LR Timelapse? Well, we need to save that data that we just did, that metadata, to the file, and then we can go back into LR Timelapse and use what we just did here. So we're going to do that. So we're going to come up to the metadata key, or the tab, and we're going to come down to do not read metadata from files. I've done this many times. Don't do what I do. If you accidentally click on read metadata from files, what's going to happen? Well, what's going to happen is it's going to take the metadata that we grabbed earlier and put it into Lightroom. So you're going to lose those edits. You have to be careful with that. I think they should really move these two commands apart from each other. So we want to save the metadata to files because we've already made the edits here in Lightroom. So we want to save everything that we've done to the file. So I click Save Metadata up in the top left. It gives you the confirmation. And once that's done, we're ready to go back into LR Timelapse. Okay guys, so we just saved the metadata and we're ready to go back into LR Timelapse. So let's click away from Lightroom and get back into LRT5. So we're back here and now Lightroom has made all of the saves to the metadata. And now we're back into LR Timelapse. LR Timelapse has caught the ball and we're ready to reload that metadata. So next step, as you can see here, is from LR is to reload. So we're going to click that reload tab here and see what happens. So reload is now taking the metadata, including those images that we edited, and it just loaded that information. Now we're going to click the auto transition based on those keyframes that we just did. LR Timelapse does all the magic for you. It's really great, and it just did that. Don't worry about what if you don't understand all of that. Don't worry about it. So what we're going to do next is take a look at visual previews, and this is where, depending on your computer and your hard drive, it can take quite a bit. In fact, this is probably one of the second longest step in the process. But I'm going to click visual previews. It starts off by saying saving, and LR Timelapse gets by beginning to render visual previews. I can hear my PC really cranking up. My video card's getting to work, and it's already at 5%, 6, 7, 8% rendering visual previews. I'll be right back once it's all done. So now that we're in the visual deflicker tab, we want to smooth the entire piece so that it looks very clean. The exposure and everything is very smooth. And this even tells you here smoothing. And by clicking this, the default is 10, max pass is 2, and selected is the multi-pass deflicker. The more you do this, the smoother the footage looks. Not luminance, that has nothing to do with noise reduction. So smoothing just has to do with making sure the exposure is good from frame to frame. So by clicking the smoothing tab here, if you look here, the green line is what is going to be done to it by doing that. I usually like to go anywhere between 10 and 20. And if your exposure is ramped up and a lot more zigzaggy on this timeline, you'll see more of an oscilloscope looking bar, but you know, whatever that's called. And so I think right here it already looks pretty good. So I'm just going to select somewhere right around there. And then I do like to always do a multi-pass deflicker. If you have a lot of flickering from the sun shining through the clouds or whatever, you might want to have 3 passes. And what it's going to do is obviously it's going to make adjustments 3 full times. In this case, I'm just going to stick with 2 and click apply. And this could take some time also. And as I click here, I'm going to wait. And as you can see here, it says refining deflicker. And it's got actually pretty quick. But I will come on back just so you guys don't have to sit there for the 1 minute while it does it all. So you've completed the visual deflicker process and you're finally ready to go back to Lightroom. In this case, we want to hand that ball back off to Lightroom from LR Timelapse. So now that that's done, you can view your preview if you like. I'm not going to worry about that because it's not a very pretty looking preview anyway from here. After this, it even shows you render preview, and if you hover over it, it gives you the actual instructions on what to do next in case you forget this. So let's go ahead and go back over to Lightroom. Now everything is still selected, right? We have our entire sequence ready to go. And I'm going to go back up to metadata. And what do we want to do with the metadata? Now that we've made all the changes in LR Timelapse to all the metadata to make sure everything looks good to go, we need to collect that metadata again and put it back into Lightroom. So we're going to make sure everything's selected, go to metadata, and now do we want to save it to files, or do we want to read it to files? We don't want to click save because it will save what Lightroom did, not what LR Timelapse did. So in reading, we're collecting that metadata that Lightroom LR Timelapse did to the files just a little while ago. So we're going to read the metadata from files, and you'll know that what you did was correct when your preview starts showing up here, and you can see the changes were made throughout, not just those 6 images, but everything now. All of the edits are done for you, and LR Timelapse worked its magic, and now every single image in this 763 time lapse is being exposed properly and edited properly from frame to frame. And if you go all the way down, you'll see that all of these are done, and we're almost done here in reading the XMP data, metadata. So guys, the final couple of steps, you're in the home stretch, and I'm going to show you what I do to actually render the video. You don't have to render the video also, but you do want to export these settings as a 4K clip. And here is where I highly recommend that you export to a folder also that is on an SSD and not a 5800 RPM hard disk drive. You can do that if you like, but you're still going to just slow things down a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click. Now that everything's selected, you can go to file, but I'm going to right click on this and go down to export. And when I go here, I actually have a shortcut here, but I'm just going to click export here and show you guys what I have. Let me bring that up here. Now I have the output path. I have a folder on a SD an SSD called Timelapse 2020, and it's got all of my time lapses I've been using. Name the sequence. You can give it a title, and I'm just going to leave it as what the sequence in Lightroom is called. You can up the resolution so you can have even larger files, but in this case I only want a 4K video, so clicking the 4K option is good enough here. I don't have LRT Pro, and you can actually save that into TIFF or 16-bit, and the advanced settings, I don't do anything with that stuff. And it even gives you a little bit of a instruction down here too when you're ready to do that. But once you're all set here in 4K, then I'm going to click export. And here's where it takes the longest, because now it needs to take each image and export JPEGs of each image. So it is going to make 763 photos. Thankfully, it's pretty quick on my computer, and I am using a processor as well as a 2080 Ti as a graphics card, and that seems to render pretty quick once I do all of that. 763 photos, that's going to take a while even then. All right, guys, it took, I don't know, around 30 minutes to export all those photos, and in your case it might be user mileage may vary, let's put it that way. So I have this automatically comes up once I finished exporting the images in Lightroom. I get this window where I'm able to render the video. You don't have to render it, you can cancel it and use any other program like Premiere Pro or After Effects or whatever those other programs are to render a time lapse of several hundred, images or whatever. I like to just render it anyway and have this as well. And in fact, I've done a lot of my time lapses where I just use each video, and I put them together in Premiere Pro, and I think I'm going to be migrating away from that in the near future, but it's just something that I learned to do to begin with, and I'm going to be trying a new way. According to this, it gives you the task. It shows you the output file, so if you want to change those things, you want to come back here and select 4K. You can also export it in 720, 1080, 3K, 4K UHD. I like to leave my frame rate at 29.97 speed. I can change all that in Premiere Pro if I want to do that and speed it up or slow it down. I don't really mess with it. This even shows me I have a video length of about 25 seconds for 763 images. For quality, I like to use ultra high. That makes your file size larger, but you want a nice, super crisp, short 4K video. That's why we're doing 4K anyway, right? You can force the output to 16:9, and you can see the little dot, the lines there. It's actually going to shrink it down to the 16:9 box there, letter box, but I don't like that anymore. I used to do that all the time, and a lot of my older footage is only at 16:9, but the problem is by not utilizing the entire frame, when I go to zoom or pan, I'm not able to do that without losing a lot of quality, because if I force the output and then I use zoom or pan in Premiere Pro, then I'm actually, if I zoom in, and this is already at 4K, it's less than 4K and it looks kind of soft and it just doesn't look good. So I don't do that anymore. I will import the entire footage into Premiere Pro and then either crop it in or zoom or pan if I need to, and that gives me a little bit of leeway. I learned that the hard way. Motion blur, I like to add a little bit of motion blur. It just helps the transition of, especially with the clouds, to just kind of look seamless. You can add more or less, season to taste. I usually keep it around 3. I don't usually mess with it. Sharpen, I will do that, and sometimes I will unclick it if I think the footage is already super sharp, but that doesn't seem to do much of anything. You can also add a copyright or timestamp, but in this case I'm good to go. After it's done, I click the show settings, show in Explorer, and when I click render, we'll come on back and see what it looks like. And this doesn't take very long, and down here it shows you that it's rendering video at the bottom left. Let's see what it looks like once it's done rendering. So there you have it, guys. My image, my time-lapse sequence of a storm over Rio Rico has completely rendered, and I'm just using the little Windows video viewer or whatever it's called to show it. So let's see how it looks. The detail is really great. I mean, this is super sharp. It's in 4K, but my goodness, you can see the little houses and the clouds are just billowing up. Very pretty. I still have not learned how to get rid of a bunch of birds in the sky, although I've just recently learned how to get rid of dust spots and learn how to pan and zoom as well, which makes the videos a lot better. I hope you guys like this. That's about it for now. There's plenty other things I can do as far as tutorials, but I hope that you guys like it. I hope you subscribe and hope that and I hope to make more of these for you in the future. So let me know what you think, and we'll talk to y'all later.